Hey, everybody, welcome to Relish This, the nonprofit marketing podcast. I'm your host, Stu Swineford. I'm one of the co-founders of Relish Studio. We're a digital marketing agency committed to helping nonprofits thrive. And my guest today is Tamra Ryan, and she is the CEO of the Women's Bean Project. And they were founded back in the 80s with $500 and a great idea. And they have been creating this social enterprise that helps women who are struggling to attain and maintain work, get training and go through their program and be better, more employable and better employees. And we had a really cool conversation, mostly around what they do at Women's Bean Project and all the amazing things that they've been able to accomplish over the years, including setting up processes. And one of the things that I think is really remarkable is this idea of, as a nonprofit, finding a mechanism by which you can charge for your services. So creating a revenue stream that comes from kind of a for-profit model. So I hope you enjoy the show. Here we go. Tamra Ryan with the Women's Bean Project. Thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
It's great to be here.
Well, thank you for joining me. So you guys have been around for about 17 years, and you do some really cool things that I'm going to let you tell our listeners about a little bit more effectively than I probably will. But yeah, give us a brief overview of what you have going on at the Women's Bean Project.
Sure. Well, actually, we just celebrated our 31st birthday as an organization. Yeah, we were founded in 1989, and we're a social enterprise from the very beginning. Our founder was volunteering at a daytime homeless shelter for women and kids, and she saw that women would come and use the services of the shelter because they didn't have a job. So they didn't have anywhere to go during the day. And then they'd leave because they'd eventually get a job. But the same women kept coming back over and over again. She was there for a whole year because she was getting her master's in social work. So she saw women leaving and returning. And what she realized was that the women might have the skills to get a job, but they didn't have the skills to keep it.
Oh, interesting.
She invested $500 of her own money and bought beans and started making 10 bean soup and hired 2 women. And so there was nothing scientific about it. They just thought this would be, an interesting way to teach skills by making a product. So that was in 1989. And from that $500 investment, they made $6,100 in sales. Wouldn't it be awesome to have that kind of return on investment for every investment?
I would love that. That would be amazing.
So that was 31 years ago. And today we are, in many ways, we're similar because we still hire women experiencing chronic unemployment. And now we teach them the skills that they need to get and keep employment. So we're still a food manufacturer. So we make, from that original product of one bean soup mix, now we make 50 different food products that we distribute all across the country. Interestingly, our bestseller is still that 10 bean soup.
Oh, that's really great.
And so we sell those all across the country, and we hire women experiencing chronic unemployment. A typical woman we hire hasn't had a job longer than a year in her lifetime, though the average age is 38.
Okay.
So they have long histories of addiction and incarceration, and really having had jobs where the employer doesn't care whether she shows up. If she doesn't show up, they'll just replace her with someone else.
Okay.
And we want to change that pattern. So we focus on job readiness skills, the idea that you have to come to work every day and on time and take direction and pay attention to detail. Of course, it doesn't matter where you work. You have to do those things. But what makes us different is that also we pay the women during the time that they're working on what we call the U job, the YOU job. Okay. So that's the job where she's working on herself. She's working on learning problem solving and goal setting and budgeting and planning and organizing and computer skills. So we have a whole curriculum that she goes through during the 6 to 9 months that she's with us, so that when she leaves us, she's not just a better employee, but she's a better mom and a better community member.
Right. Is there a pretty standard? Well, first of all, I love the language that you guys use on the site and in your programs where these women are actual graduates of the program. I think that's just a really neat spin on that idea. Is what are the typical challenges that most of the people who are in the program are facing? Is it incarceration and addiction, or what do you typically see most?
Well, what we like to think, how we think about it is barriers to employment. And barriers
Mhm.
to employment can look like a lot of things, but
Right.
I will tell you, they never happen in singularity, right? So often every woman we hire has an average of 2 to 3 kids, though often she had her first child when she was in high school. So that might have led to her dropping out of school at that time.
Right.
She might have grown up in an environment where she didn't have role models for employment. I can't tell you how many times one of our program participants has said something like, when I was growing up, I didn't know anybody who worked. And
Wow.
when you think about how profound that would be on a kid, of
Yeah.
growing up in a household where the norms of going to work every day just don't exist, and when they look around, they see that really their future looks like the same thing, not working, maybe selling drugs because that's what they
Right.
witnessed, and which often leads to both addiction and then incarceration. And so it's really, it's a predictable pattern, and yet at the same time those are all the things that ultimately create barriers to her being able to get a good job. We think about the next job she's going to have is a job with an opportunity for advancement
Mhm.
and benefits, and where the employer is invested in her.
Right. Well, that's just great work. I think, in this day and age, a lot of us would really benefit from that kind of a program. So it's really cool that you guys are providing that for these women who are really in need. Um, what, so is your model sort of self-sustaining, or do you have a donation type model? What's the funding look like in terms of, because you are selling these products, so there's probably a profit component to the business in terms of you're wanting to demonstrate that to the workers as well. So what does that look like for you guys?
So the business is self-sustaining. So the business allows us to pay the wages of the women, buy the
Hmm.
materials and pay the wages of the women as they're working in the business. And we fundraise to fund the program uh, components.
Okay.
So the women are paid regardless of whether they're working on the production line or they're sitting in a computer class. If someone gives us a donation or a grant, the donation or grant is going to support the time that a woman is in a computer class or in a learning how to budget or learning how to do an interview. So
Right.
that's really how we're funded. And we're about 60-40. 60% of our total operating budget is sales, and 40% is through grants and donations.
That's a healthy mix. That's pretty amazing. What are the biggest challenges you guys see with the donations, particularly this year? I mean, we've had such an influx of challenges worldwide. Then with the economic downturn, are you meeting your goals for that 40%, or are things lagging? How are things going with you this year?
The interesting thing when there are challenges is that many people understand that human services organizations need additional investment.
Hmm.
And so, even in 2008 and 2009, during the recession, giving to human services organizations went up. And we're seeing that as well. So, we're not lagging in terms of our individual donors and also not in terms of our grants,
Oh, good.
which is great because our number of applicants has increased dramatically,
Right.
and our sales are going crazy. So we're learning that we've been around for 31 years, and a pandemic is what it takes for dry beans to be in great demand. So we're all the way around. We're actually benefiting from the time right now, except for the fact that it's so stressful.
Right.
Every single person is affected by the pandemic,
Right.
and so trying to even emotionally and mentally help everyone feel supported, I think is probably the biggest challenge as a leader of the organization right
Yeah.
now. Because, this is probably the only thing in our lifetimes that has affected every single person, but it's affected us all in different ways.
Yeah, it certainly has. Did you experience the supply chain? I remember back at the beginning of the pandemic and the shutdowns, and you'd go to the grocery store and like there would be no rice or beans at all. Did you guys suffer a supply chain challenge this year too, or?
Only a couple of minor things.
Okay.
We had, at one point, we had a problem. Our bean soup are in boxes. They're
Yep.
little gabled boxes that sit on the store shelves. And our manufacturer of those boxes bumped our order to to produce PPE
Yeah.
boxes. And so, of course, totally necessary, but that stalled an order that we had at that time. And then there was a point at which we couldn't get split peas for a little while. But for the most part, we've been pretty fortunate that from a supply chain standpoint, we've been able to get most of our materials. And our bigger challenge is just the timing of it and having enough people on site to work. You know, the constraints that you have as a manufacturer, food manufacturer, are that we are considered a critical business. So we can continue to operate. Yet we've had to increase all the safety measures, dramatically, which is good for everyone. We've had no cases of COVID in our midst. But then it's, making sure as much as possible people are distanced and people don't eat lunch together. And it's, all the things that get added on to it.
Right. One of my friends is one of the founders of Scratch Labs, and he and I get to ride bikes every once in a while. And he's been telling me just about all of the hand wash in and out of the doors and just all of the protocol that they had to put in place and all of that stuff. And so it's certainly a challenge. And I think just as, people are people and we're social creatures, and it's hard to keep people away from each other when we get together. And so I think as a manufacturer, that's got to be really a very big challenge for you.
It is. And then you layer on top that we are also a human services organization that's running in parallel to that. So how do we provide the program services in a way that also keeps everyone safe and still acknowledges that by design, we're not trying to have the women stay with us forever. Right. We want them to blossom and launch into their next part of their life. Right. And so it's always this work is always like plate spinning. Yes. And now it's just like somebody added, 20 more plates. Yeah. And now they're at 3 different levels. And, it feels a little just like just more of more. Right.
Right. How many women are working at any one time in your facilities?
Right now we're space constrained. And we actually will be moving to a new building in March of 2022, which is great for us. But right now in our space, about 15 women can be program participants. In a year, we hire about 60 to 70. Okay. We hire every month, so we adjust that number depending on what we know our demands are going to be.
And then people stay in the program for about 9 months? It's
6 to 9 months. The average often ends up being about 7. Okay. And that is, most recently, it's been about 7 because the job market was so awesome that, the women were leaving very quickly. As soon as they started job search, they'd find a job.
Wow, that's great. That's really, the success stories that you have on your site are just fantastic, just to see how many people retain work after leaving and get jobs like out of the program. It's really, really neat.
The reason I've been there for 17 years, I've been the CEO for 17 years, is just because I get the great opportunity to meet the women on their first day and witness maybe their skepticism. Maybe they come across as seeming angry or a little bit resentful. And then over, 6 to 9 months isn't that long to entirely transform your life and set yourself on a different path. But they literally blossom. It's so amazing to get that, in our lifetime, we're lucky if we get that kind of opportunity in our work to see to witness that kind of transformation. It's really pretty amazing.
Oh, it sounds incredible. Yeah. So do you, in looking at how to kind of expand your mission, are you looking to, it sounds like you're going to grow your facility, so potentially adding more opportunity there. But that just increases all the infrastructure of everything in terms of you need people who can teach skill classes, and I'm assuming you have some counseling that's going on as well, and HR kind of help. Are you just adding
all of those things,
adding people to that list?
Well, we're going to be smart about it because the purpose of moving to a new facility is really to give us the opportunity to expand the business because sales create jobs.
Yep.
So right now we turn away opportunities to, for instance, do work for other companies because that's something we're very uniquely qualified to do. We are a food manufacturer, and
Right.
we could help other companies assemble their products as well.
Sure.
But we just don't have the space to do it. So we're very focused on more space to create more jobs.
Okay.
And then we will respond from an infrastructure standpoint accordingly.
Right.
But a lot of our program classes are actually led by community volunteers.
Okay.
So, for instance, our financial literacy classes are led by people, often from a group of employees from a bank.
Oh, neat.
And so we've designed it in a way that let's talk about normal times, and then we'll
Sure.
in normal times there might be a group of employees that come from a particular bank, and one person will stand in front of the group and lead the class, and then every woman in the class will have an employee next to her explaining the material or helping her develop her budget.
Okay.
So it's very much a hands-on, and it's also an opportunity for someone really to get that personal attention that they wouldn't get in a classroom kind of setting,
Right.
and in a way that we can engage a company in our mission.
Right.
So it's a very meaningful volunteer experience.
Yeah, that's great. So it sounds you have volunteers then and donors, and then beneficiaries, the people in the program, and then you're going after grants, and I'm assuming you have corporate donors and things of that nature as well. So those
Yes.
are kind of the stakeholders that make up the mix of your crew. And is it just in Denver right now, or are you expanding to other territories?
Well, our product distribution is national, so we
Yep.
are keeping our manufacturing here in Denver.
Okay.
And our impact, I think. So as the leader of the organization, my job is to really think about what a future looks like when we're not necessary anymore, I think. And so one of the things that scares me is, especially because we have been around for 31 years and we've served multiple generations from the same family.
Okay.
I'm afraid that if we are not careful, in 20 years, we'll be serving the daughters of the women we serve today. And
Right.
I don't think that should be okay with us. I think that every woman who comes to us should receive services that are so effective and far reaching that she is the last person in her family to need us.
Right.
And so I would prefer to double down on this community and become unnecessary. And maybe we have to do something crazy like hire men, and have that kind of impact. And
Right.
then as a way to help expand the concept, help other organizations around the country do what we do. So not make bean soup. In fact, I wouldn't necessarily recommend getting into the food business. But there is something unique about what we do where we combine the work with the skill, the soft skill building,
Yeah.
and ultimately create a much more well-rounded employee
Right.
for someone else.
Well, it feels like there's a model there that you could plug whatever the product is, and it could be even services into that mix in terms of you have the vision of we're bringing people in who are work challenged or employment challenged, or what was the language that you used?
Barriers to employment.
Barriers
Yeah.
to employment. So you bring those people in, you give them jobs to get them used to having full-time employment, as well as all of these skills that they're bringing to the table. Whether that's bean soup or bike parts or some sort of service. It really, that piece doesn't matter as much. So that's kind of a neat, repeatable, scalable endeavor for sure.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've always had this philosophy that whatever problem we encounter, I know someone else has had the same problem, and probably had some attempt to solve it, and probably learned something from that attempt, whether it was successful or not. What I like to say is we've got 31 years worth of mistakes that we can help you avoid if we collaborate and work together and really think about our work together as lifting up the whole field.
Right.
I do think that social enterprise is a really interesting way to use business and to use consumerism to solve social problems. And that's, to me, what is really intriguing about this work is that we're actually exploiting, I guess, an activity that someone would do anyway. They're buying food products and they're consuming those food products. And we're using that as a means to change people's lives.
Right. Is that part of your messaging in terms of the product sales as well? Are you trying to capture that kind of B Corp idea in terms of this, buying this product is not just going to, make your tummy happy and be healthy and feed your family and do all of those things that buying any food product or would do, but also expands the community? Has that social message been part of the advertising for your products?
It's a big part of what we do. So when you look at any one of our products, our bean soup as an example, there's a little sticker on the front that says, "These beans create jobs." Or if you look at our brownie mix, it says, "These brownies create jobs." And so that's the first thing we want somebody to know that piques their curiosity, is that this isn't just a bean soup. This is actually creating jobs. And then we have a key message, a quick message that starts with, we believe that all women have the power to transform their lives through employment. And that is on every package as well, because I think it's really often our products end up in somebody's hands, maybe as a gift or in a store in New Jersey. And we've never had the opportunity to have a direct interaction with that customer.
Right.
So I think it's really important. And we're pretty lucky because we have this product that is emblematic of what we do. So yes, it's a yummy food item, because we wouldn't have been able to be around for 31 years if it wasn't.
Right.
But it's about more than that. And the other thing that we do is every product is sealed with a sticker that says "lovingly handmade by," and it's signed by a woman in the program. And to me, that's also a really important thing, that there is somebody behind it that is not just, a corporation or, the man, so to speak.
Right.
It's actually somebody whose life is being changed. And I can't tell you how often we get a letter from somebody who says, "Dear Susan, I just had your bean soup. And I just want to say, keep up the good work. And I'm really proud of you." Or, and if you can capture a customer's attention like that, gosh, how amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And these are totally unsolicited responses to, someone getting a product from either at a store, picking up at a store, or as a gift.
Yeah, that's great. Did you find that it was easier to get placement in places like Whole Foods and that had that kind of idea, or are you guys in regular, everyday everyday supermarkets across the nation?
Well, our longest grocery relationship is actually with King Soopers or Kroger. So we've been in Kroger stores since 1992, so for a really long time. And what we've learned is that we can often get the opportunity to be on shelves because of the mission, but if we don't sell through, we're out.
Yep.
So it doesn't, it only gives us, it only maybe opens the door. It doesn't keep the door open.
Yeah.
And so that's been, a huge challenge for us from a marketing and sales standpoint, is because what most of us don't realize, if you're not in the food business, is how much money gets spent by brands to stay on store shelves and to have the kind of placement so that you're looking right at the Frito-Lay product when you walk in. And it just, you'd never have any reason to know that if you're not in the business.
Well, I know that also it's fairly cutthroat in terms of, if getting in can be a really bad thing in terms of once you're in, if you don't meet the requirements, if the sell-through isn't good enough, then, and you drop off, like you never have another shot at that.
I think that's where that's true. Sometimes, certainly, that is true with some chains, and with others, we have a tendency to go back and say, let's talk about how we might be successful this time. And here's what we're doing in this chain. And this says, we're doing quite well here. How might we be able to do this with your chain? And that's the good thing about being around as long as we have, is that we've obviously had a lot of successes, so we can use those successes and then go to, even somebody where we lost shelf space.
Right.
But we also, in those instances, we have to go into that relationship knowing what it's going to take. Mm-hmm. And we might not be willing to spend that kind of money.
Right.
Every dollar we spend on advertising or promotions is money that we don't have to hire another woman.
Right.
And so that's the tricky part. It's what I love about what I do and also find challenging is that we do these two things that are kind of in conflict. Right? You wouldn't, if you were going to try to make a lot of money being in the food business, you wouldn't intentionally hire people who have a history of not showing up to work, who, all the things that we look for intentionally. And then we get the women to the point where they're great employees, and then we let them leave to become somebody else's great employee. It's, I joke that it's like we come to work every day and shoot ourselves in the foot and say, ow, that hurt. And then we come in the next day and we shoot ourselves in the foot again. And yet at the same time, because of the rewards of when somebody actually, stays employed, for longer than she ever has, or, we've been around long enough now, we might have a graduate who graduated 20 years ago.
Right.
Where she, her kids grew up not knowing a time she didn't work, or her grandchildren, she's ready to retire. Right. That's pretty cool.
That's super cool. I think that those two, we really like working. My business is called Relish Studio, and we are a digital marketing agency, and we really love working with purpose-driven companies because there's something behind that, the mission of those companies, other than just making profit. And certainly profit and revenue is on everyone's mind, and that's an important thing to be chasing and to be aware of. But we've just found that it's just so refreshing to have something more than that. So you're certainly considering profit and revenues, but you're also contributing to the well-being of this sector of our society that's really has some big challenges, and you're helping lift them up. And so it just becomes that much greater. So especially when you have success in both of those, like you guys are experiencing, it makes those challenges worth it in terms of the shooting yourself in the foot every day and then doing it again.
I say to our team sometimes when we're having a big challenge and we're trying to work it out, hey, you guys, look, if this were easy, everybody'd do it. And then where would we be?
Well, there'd be another challenge and we'd be worried about that instead. Yeah. It's funny how that works. I find myself saying that a lot too. Because people expect things to just have a magic bullet. And it's like, well, if it had a magic bullet, then everyone would just do that and there'd be some other problem we'd be solving for. So that would be lovely. But at the end of the day, it's just not how things work usually. Exactly. And we also will just go, manufacture or find some other problem to go solve. So it's pretty cool. So you mentioned a few minutes ago, you talked about challenges that you guys have gone through. And that's a conversation I have a lot is that, particularly when we're in crisis, we as people tend to think we're on an island, and we're really, believe like we're the only person that's ever gone through this, and we get very down. And so having that ability to tap into a network of other people, entrepreneurs or other students or people who've been through the same challenges that one is facing at this current time can be just really refreshing. And so, what are some of the things that if you were speaking to either your younger self coming into that role, 17 years ago as CEO, or someone who's forming a nonprofit today or is in the first few years of running their nonprofit, what are some of those challenges that you guys have that you've gone through and that you would be able to help people avoid, do you think?
So I think I have a much better ability to sort of be able to condense this into a single thought, because I think a lot of the challenges early on were seemed so disparate that I was trying to address them all individually. And now I see that, there were a few things that were a theme. One is, regardless of whether you're running a business for shareholder benefit or you're running a business with a mission in mind, you have to run a good business. Mm-hmm. So you have to, have a good handle on your cost of goods. You have to have a strong supply chain. There are just so many things about running a good business that can get overlooked when you're so focused on fulfilling a mission. Right. That, the idea that, well, but I'm doing this for a good reason, so people will overlook the other things. That doesn't happen. The bottom line is that you still have a bottom line. Right. And so if there is no profitability in the work that you do, then you won't survive. And I knew that intuitively, but I also realized that there were a lot of things that led to that, to being a strong business and a strong workplace and a strong employer. Right. And having all of our systems in place, and, not in a bureaucratic kind of way, because that is counter to my nature, but in a way that is, when this happens, this is what we do. Right. Because we know that. And I've used to say things like, what kind of Mickey Mouse operation is this? Don't we have a process? and now we do. And I would say then the next bigger picture lesson that comes to mind is that whether we're producing a product, or this would be the same if we had a service, or we're producing a great employee, we have a brand promise. Right. And we need to always be mindful of what that brand promise is. So even if we start out by saying, when we say a woman is successful, she graduates our program, what does that look like? What are the qualities and characteristics that she has? Then we need to build a program that gets women to that point. Right. That's what a brand promise is, that when somebody sees on a woman's resume that she graduated from Women's Bean Project, that has to have meaning. And that has to be something that, if we don't define it, other people will define it for us, and we might not like what they decide. Right. And so the same goes for, our soup products or our baking mixes, all of those things. But I think a lot of times when you're in a mission-oriented organization, you don't think about brand promise in that way. But I think you should. I think it needs to be applied across everything that you do.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times you're absolutely right that nonprofits tend to get very mission focused and forget that a nonprofit is actually a business. And you mentioned something earlier which resonated really strongly with me in that, marketing and sales aren't dirty words necessarily. And in the nonprofit space, I think that there's a general antagonism towards investing in those areas. But if it's a smart investment and you're expecting a return and you're measuring and you're doing all the things correctly to foster or to have that investment grow, your mission and expand your mission, then it's certainly something that that's worthwhile, and it's not taking food out of somebody's mouth. It's putting more food in more mouths. And I do think that a lot of nonprofit leaders do get a little blinders on in regards to that mission and failing to run their organizations as businesses. So it's refreshing to hear you say that.
Well, and I think as a sector, we've got to stop thinking about that as a bad thing. And as a business sector, we've got to stop thinking that just because someone is in a nonprofit, they're not running it like a business. Right. I think we've got to sort of meet in the middle, because I think that there are misperceptions on either side of the equation. I just happened to be, I came from the business world before I came to the Bean Project. Mm-hmm. So I did not come from the nonprofit, professionally from a nonprofit mindset. And I remember, though, when I first started, I would say, but why aren't we, fill in the blank question? And people would look at me like, we don't do that in the nonprofit world. And I was like, but why not?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, you guys said, I mean, the Women's Being Project is such an interesting blend. And, it's not unique to nonprofits to have a profit center and a for-profit kind of segment of their business that drives 60% of your operating budget. So, right. It is a little bit of a different mix, and that's something that we would encourage nonprofits when they're trying to conceive of ways to expand that mission, and they start looking at where revenues are coming from, is that maybe there is an opportunity to do kind of a for-profit play and have a product or a service that you're charging for as part of that as part of that mix. It just becomes kind of a healthy mix of opportunity to drive revenue.
Yeah, and I think that what's challenging is getting a shift in mindset to be willing to ask somebody maybe who's never been asked to pay for a service to actually pay for it, to charge something for that service. And there are a lot of organizations that I know struggle with that, making that shift of mentality. And it's not because they don't believe that their service has value or worth. It's just that they've never really been in a place where they were asking someone to pay for it. At least that's what they're thinking. But really, when you're in a situation where you're providing a service, somebody's paying for it.
Right.
But usually that model is that grants and donations are paying for it.
Yes.
And I remember once a woman who's a fundraising consultant said, she was talking about how she thinks about fundraising. And she said, I would love to have, someone experiencing homelessness come and sleep on my couch until they get their feet back under them. But I also recognize that I'm helping one person.
Right.
But if I give money to a shelter, then they're going to be able to help a lot of people. So that model of giving money, so I'm basically paying the shelter to do the work that I'm willing to do myself so that they can have a greater impact.
Right.
And I thought that was a really great reframing, because she first believed in the work, and secondly, she believed that it had value and it was something she was willing to, in her words, pay for.
Right.
And I think often in a traditional nonprofit setting, when as organizations are trying to think about, well, what do we either do, have, or think about that we could charge for, they have a really hard time getting over that hump.
Yeah. It's cool when you can see that happen in a nonprofit world. And we work with the Colorado Youth Corps Association, and they are kind of this hub for a bunch of youth corps around the state. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not, but at the end of the day, those youth corps they're charging for those services in a lot of cases. So there may be a land owner or a land manager that needs, fencing done or noxious weeds removed or fire mitigation or things of that nature. And they're paying this force to come in. So there is that component that does turn it into a service-based, for fee kind of mechanism. And obviously those corps are also receiving grants and donations and all the other stuff that nonprofits benefit from. But there is that component of being able to sell something, which is really cool.
Yeah, and then you think about what that says to those youth, right? That says what they're doing has value, and somebody's willing to pay for it. And I think that's a really important message to send, is that this isn't just like we got a bunch of kids together and they're cheap and so we're just going to get them to do the work.
Yeah.
It is what you're doing. We've been hired to do this work because what you do is valuable.
Right. And that applies to what you are doing in your organization as well. If you weren't generating profits and you weren't generating revenue from this, it would just be this weird charity thing. And so the ownership and the pride I'm sure that the people who come through your programs feel as being part of this successful business has got to be a key component to their growth and their, how they get better and do better.
It's super important. And so what we try to do, because, one of our biggest sellers is our 10 bean soup. And so from the women's perspective, it probably feels like all they're ever doing is making 10 bean soup.
Right.
And so we try to show them, okay, here are how our sales go. And here's when our peak in sales are typically from September through December. And this is how many units of 10 bean soup we sell typically in a year. And it is so that they're not disconnected from the work. And then always we share, when we get letters from customers, or other supporters, we're always making sure we share them, because I think and this would be the case with any employee, it would be easy to be doing your work, and feel like you're doing it in a vacuum and not make the connection to the fact that, hey, this product actually is going to end up in Florida.
Right.
And my name's on it. How cool is that? One of our graduates said, she worked in our shipping department, and she said, every time I send a package, I'm so excited because it means I'm going somewhere. And I know that I've done a good job of packing this, and it's an accurate order, and it's well packaged, and it's going to arrive at their destination, and people are going to be glad they got it. But I know I did that.
Oh, that's amazing. That's super cool. So we're coming into kind of that giving season. Are you guys doing, are you hitting that pretty hard in terms of is this the biggest time of year for donations for you, or do you have have you spread that out kind of over the full year at this point?
It's certainly a big time of year because people think about giving this time of year. We do one big fundraiser, and we do it as a graduation celebration, and we do that in April. So that's a pretty big time of year for us also. But the opportunity also to interact with our supporters is so much greater this time of year. So It is a big giving season. There's, of course, Colorado Gives Day for people inside Colorado, and there's Giving Tuesday for people outside of Colorado. We have a fortunate opportunity to receive gifts, donations from people who are our customers outside of Colorado in a way that we wouldn't if we were just local. And so there's lots of ways people can give. And then what we're finding right now, especially, is that a lot of employers who may or may not have given corporate gifts, to their clients in past years, this year are giving gifts to their employees and having them sent to their homes because so many employees are working at home. And that has been a great opportunity for us because, we're selling comfort food. Right. And, and we have snacks and we have dog biscuits. And so we have sort of something for everyone. So a lot of our sales right now are giving somebody the opportunity to give, which is also pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, you could just package up a kind of a collection of some of your best-selling things into a gift basket and sell that as a line item.
Well, we do. So we have we do it as gift boxes, sort of like when you get a Harry and David box, and the law presentation when you open it. And so we have a variety of different product mixes that we sell through. For any time, but especially this time of year, they're pretty popular.
Oh, I bet. Are you doing? I know you have online sales as well as in brick and mortar. Are you doing any subscription model type stuff along those sales channels?
So, I'm the person who everybody says, that's a great idea, but not now. And so we will be moving to a subscription model, even if it is, we start out quarterly, because we're consumable products. So it's, we're a great mix, so to speak, for subscription. So I imagine that we'll be doing that in 2021. This year, because our sales have been, normally March and April our sales start to decline. It's just not, bean soup doesn't say summer as much as I try to convince people.
Yeah.
I've been pushing chili dogs for 17 years, but normally sales start to go down as the weather gets warmer. This year, in the first 2 weeks of March, we did more sales through our Amazon marketplace than we did for all of 2019 through that channel.
Holy
So we
smokes.
really we were not expecting that, and so sales have been elevated for the whole calendar year for us. So it was not a good time to introduce something new.
Well, that's that visionary problem, right? Where you're always coming up with these great ideas. And everyone's
Yes.
like, would you just let us do our thing here for 2
Yeah.
minutes?
Well, one of the things I joked that we're the victim of our own good idea. We introduced last year snacks. So they're little bags of 2 to 3 servings of 7 different really yummy snacks, trail mix with ginger in it, some raspberry gummy fish that are, never get hard like Swedish
Right.
fish.
Right.
And those are selling like crazy right now.
I bet.
And you never really know when you introduce a new product. You don't know in real time how well it's going to sell. You really know a year or so later. And so now we're seeing that they're doing well. And so I kind of got the stink eye when I said, you guys, I have this great idea.
How did you keep up with that increase in sales with, a limited? There were so many things coming together at the same time in terms of social distancing and, everything else. How did you keep the productivity so high?
I think it really is that we have a team of people who just do what it takes to get it done. What I always think about when, because we're so seasonal, we always have to have the capacity to get to a really high level,
Okay.
even if we're only at that point for a couple months of the year.
Right.
Our 70%. In usual years, 70% of our sales happen between September and December.
Right.
So we have to be able to ramp up. And so we had that ability to ramp up just at a different time.
Okay.
And
that totally makes sense. Yeah.
And all that said, it's still, people are tired at this point. And, so we've just got to keep making the donuts, so to speak, and,
Right.
keep coming in every morning and doing it. And then just sort of rolling with the punches, which, on different days, you can do that more easily than others, I think.
Well, sure. Yeah. I think that's everybody has that challenge. And I would anticipate that the people that you serve would have those challenges really affect them quite a lot.
It's been interesting to watch. It's been a little bit mixed. So the women we serve, if you think about it, don't control a lot of things in their life anyway, often.
Right.
And so early on, especially, things like the public transportation, certain lines were shutting down, and there were all kinds of things. And at that point, in March and April, and maybe even into May, every day it felt like something new was coming out.
Right.
And I think I was way more stressed than the women we were serving.
Right.
Because, I'm accustomed to having a fair amount of agency over what's happening in my life. I create a plan and I execute on the plan and, make adjustments as needed. And what I've learned in all of this is that my plans don't actually make sense.
Right.
Or don't matter. I can plan all I want, but it doesn't really matter if there's a new, mayor, the mayor makes a new rule, or the governor, has a new mandate.
Right. Well, I really love what you're doing. I like to end all of my conversations with an action ask. One of the things that drives me nuts is when it's just all talk and then nothing ever gets done. And so I'd like to ask my guests if there's one thing that you could have people do, either related to your organization or just in general, go for a hike or whatever. What would be that thing that you'd like for people to do after listening to our show today?
Well, it's bean soup season. So, and bean soup is really good for you. So I would recommend, even if it's not Women's Bean Project products, but preferably it would be, get some bean soup and make it for your family and sit down and have a family meal.
I love that. And where can people find your organization? What's the URL, or where would you encourage them to go look for your products?
Well, the easiest place where all of our products can be found is womensbeanproject.com. And you can also get it at Amazon, and you can get us at King Soopers and City Market stores across the state, all the Whole Foods in the region, or even Safeway stores. So there's a lot of different ways you could get our products.
Well, that's great. I would encourage everyone to go out and find some 10 bean soup or some other Women's Bean Project product and give it a whirl, because you guys are doing some really great stuff. And thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Oh, I had a blast. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great.
Bye. All right, there you have it. Another episode of Relish This, the nonprofit marketing podcast. If you want to continue the conversation and see how we can unearth some gold for your organization, head over to relishstudio.com/podcast to sign up to be a guest on the show. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of Relish This.